And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Robert Lindsy Milne. Robert is a fellow YouTube podcaster, and he is recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful psychic intuitive counselors of his time. He has traveled the world giving insight with his psychic intuitive sessions to tens of thousands of people. Robert, thank you so much for being my guest today, and welcome.
I've been really excited since yesterday. I've been looking forward to talking with you and sharing some things, some stories and ideas and stuff like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm really curious to see what your predictions are of 2022 and your psychic abilities. And let's just start here. How did you discover you were a psychic in the first place?
Great story. We all, by the way, all the people that do this work have a really interesting story how we discovered it. I discovered that I have psychic awareness or psychic abilities when I was around 9 years old. But I had been doing psychic things far sooner than that. And I used to get into trouble for the things that I would say because they would upset people. Like I remember coming home from school one day, I was about either kindergarten or grade one. So I'd be like 5 or 6. And as I say, I'm an older person. I was born in 1949. So I turned 73 this coming July. So the world was a little bit different in the 1950s. But I came home from school and I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. Well, Grandma Harris actually was my great grandmother. And I was living in Toronto and my great grandmother lived in London, England. And I had only seen her once. So I came home, said, Grandma Harris died today. My mother freaked out, yelled at me and said, stop saying those terrible things. And she probably even hit me for it. And so that was like the afternoon. The very next night, we were having dinner. My father, my mother, my sister, and I were sitting at the table. And my mother said to my dad, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother for saying that Grandma Harris died. To my astonishment, they didn't. They talked about it. Why it took a day was because you couldn't do texting in 1955 and long distance calls were hard to make. So my mother heard about it the next day. For some reason, she forgot that I had said that Grandma Harris had died. To my astonishment, they talked about it. And as a kid, Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally. Who was that? Well, that one got me hit for sure. And I didn't understand. And for a long time, I was hesitant to say things because I would get into trouble. When I was 9, my father took me to a Stanley Cup semifinal, Boston and Toronto. And so we were trying to make believe fans. The series was tied 1-1. The game was tied 1-1 at the end of the third period. And when the teams came on the ice for the first overtime period, they just sort of started to stretch, and I became drawn to number 17 with Toronto Maple Leafs, and his name was Gary Eman. He was a mediocre, so he's a mediocre hockey player in the greatest league in the world, but he still was a mediocre hockey player, and he wasn't a first stringer. I knew he was going to score, and the game hadn't started. Not only did I know he was going to score, it was so real to me, it was as if he had already scored. And I was getting kind of excited and revved up, but the game hadn't started. Anyway, the referee blows his whistle. The team goes to the teams go to the bench. They turn the lights down in the building and the starting lineup on both teams are ready and they're ready to drop the puck at center ice. And Maple Leaf Gardens held about 18 to 20,000 people. And the lights were down. The entire building was silent, waiting for the game to start. And I couldn't hold back anymore. And I jumped up and started to yell and scream and cheer for Gary Eamon because he scored the overtime goal, but he wasn't even on the ice. And everybody in the building turned and looked at me and my dad. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sit down." And I did. And then the referee dropped the puck and the game started. And a couple of minutes later, Eamon jumps on the ice or jumps over the boards. And I think a guy named Red Kelly passed the puck to him. He tips it in the net, goes in. Eamon scores the overtime goal. Toronto wins and the building completely erupts. When I had jumped up and started yelling and screaming, and my dad told me to sit down, I got really silent and I thought, nobody knows Eamon's going to score. And I really wasn't paying that much attention to the game. I was focused on nobody knows he's going to score. And then he scored and the building erupted and all the flash bulbs went off. And I just listened to the crowd and I was just looking around and I thought, other people think differently. Now, it wasn't that sophisticated. I was 9 years old. But it was that realization that other people didn't see it. And things fell into place at that point. And I knew somehow, some way, that was what I was going to be doing for my lifetime. And the light hit me then. So I was about 9.
When you had those psychic premonitions, do you just have a knowingness? Or did you actually see the event like as a movie playing out in your mind?
Yeah, even today, I know rather than I see, or I feel rather than I see. But sometimes when I'm describing something, I could use I see, or I feel, or I sense. But I'm not necessarily clairvoyant or that visual in my readings. Sometimes I am, but that's not the main focus. The main focus for me is I just simply know and I speak and the words come out. That's for me, kind of like that.
Do these psychic experiences now still happen spontaneously, or are you in control of it?
Well, yes and no. I have to deliberately shut down so that I don't pick up on lots of energy around me in my personal life. Sometimes if I don't protect myself, like put a protection around, it's like, do you remember in the days when in malls when they would have a bunch of music stores and they'd have the music stores with their big speakers out blasting into the mall? It was like that, walking by three. It's like that, walking by 3 or 4 music stores that are all together playing 4 different songs, all at full blast. That's what it's like sometimes for me when I'm out walking around with people. If I'm not protected, it can get me. That's what it's like. It gets very loud. People's energy can be very loud to me.
Now, it started with you when you were 9. Before you were 9,
5, yeah.
Or 5. Do you think that there's any type of metaphysical event that happened before that could have been a catalyst to start this? Like you had some type of near-death experience or anything?
I don't recall, nor have I heard from my family that there were any of the. Oh, okay. I don't know if these two things are correlated. Okay, I don't know. However, when I was about 3, my mother had told me the story. When I was about 3 years old, I was throwing stones in Lake Ontario. And according to my mother, I fell in the water and got pulled out. And she wasn't a swimmer. And she told me that, she was up to her shoulders trying to get me. And then this man came along and jumped in the water and pulled me out. I don't know if that's connected at all. It's just simply the way I perceive things. I'm not sure. Astrologically, the astrologers that have done my chart indicate that's really where I'm most focused on, where most of my talent is.
At what point did you cultivate this talent into a profession?
I was 15 and a half. I came from a highly dysfunctional family, and a big part of my life was both physical and as well as emotional. And the first time I left home, I was 14 and a half, and I lived in downtown Toronto in the wintertime. And I survived on the streets using my psychic ability and psychic awareness. And I knew what I was doing after that event at Maple Leaf Gardens at 9. And I survived on the street using my instincts, intuitions, and to get by. And I helped a lot of other people, even when I was a child on the street. And in the springtime of that year, the police found me and took me back home. And I spent from Easter to just after my birthday in July with my family again. And then in that autumn of when I was 15, I left again. I never lived full time with my family ever again. And in that time, once again, I lived. At first, I was homeless, and then I got settled. And I knew I was doing readings. I was doing them. I was being psychic. I knew what I was doing, and it was my survival. And I heard that if you worked at a tea room in Toronto, at the Cozy Tea Room, they did tea leaf and card readings. If you worked there, and you worked in the afternoon, you would get a sandwich, a cup of tea, and some cookies, and you'd get paid. And if you worked in the evening, you got a hot dinner, cup of tea and cookies, and you got paid. And on January 17th, 1965 was coming up, like my 57th anniversary of being a psychic. I applied at the Cozy Tea Room. I was just a kid. It was a really cold January day, and the woman that owned the place her name was Mrs. Cox. And the way I got the job was I had to do readings for her. I had never done a tea leaf reading or a card reading in my life. I had no idea how to do it, but that's what I had to do. So what I did is I just picked up the teacup, had the little blobs of tea leaves, and I held the cup in front of my face like this. I looked at Mrs. Cox, and I just talked to her, pretending I was talking about stuff that was in the teacup. And then the same with when I was doing, to do card readings, I just put the cards on the table and I'd point to this card and I'd say, well, this is the 7 of hearts. And then I'd just go on and talk about whatever I was sensing about that person. And I got hired. And that day, I worked both the afternoon shift and the night shift. So I got a hot dinner, which was really good. And I got a lunch. And I got paid, and I had a job to go to the next day. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room till I was a little bit more than 21 years old. And during that time, I worked 5 days a week, 6 days a week, sometimes even 7 days a week. And there would be days where I would see 35, 40 people, or there would be days that I would see 10. By the time I finished working at the tea room, I'd done thousands of readings. I had done my 10,000 hours, and I was 21.
Do you feel like you refined your skills or got any better, or it really didn't matter because the ability didn't change anyways?
Well, at my age right now, I am more aware, better. I do better, deeper, more broad-based readings than I've ever done at any other time in my life. And I have always seen this as a talent not so much as a gift. And I've been dedicated, committed to my craft. When I was leaving the tea room, because it used to eat my guts out, when I found out that the tea room was charging $2.50 for a reading, they were doing that. Now, in those days in Toronto or in Canada, doing readings was against the law. So to get around the law, they sold a cup of tea and cookies. As entertainment, you would get a tea leaf and card reading. When I found out the tea room was getting $2.50 and I was only getting $1 of it, it ate my guts out. That I didn't mind the tea room making money. It bothered me that they were making money because of my talent and the talent of people around me. And the people that were doing this work in those days were not anywhere near as old as I am now, and they looked 20 years older than what I look now. People that did this work barely made a living and were treated really badly. And it infuriated me that this woman had made her living from people like us. And when she didn't have the talent, and I figured that out, I was about 16 when I figured that out. And I resented her doing so well, and we did so poorly. So I would often get into arguments. I got fired a few times, I quit a few times. And at around 21, I decided that I didn't want to be at the tea room anymore. It wasn't the life that I imagined. And people in those days that did this lived very poorly. They often had serious drug addictions, or they drank too much, or they were poor and unhealthy, and they lived awful lives. And that wasn't what I felt I deserved or wanted to do. And so I left the tea room. And around that time, I had also heard when a young man becomes a priest, he makes a vow to say a mass every day of his life. And I knew that at the age that I was at then, this is what I would do. And I made a vow that day that I would do at least one psychic reading or practice being psychic every day. And I went longer than 30 years without missing a day of practice. And it didn't matter how many readings I had done in the week, I would always practice, and sometimes even now today, I still practice when I'm not working, doing readings. And if somebody just happens to be calling when I'm on a day off, even though I might be booked way in advance for an appointment, if somebody calls and I'm going to practice, and I answer the phone, they'll probably get a reading because it's better to do than to practice it. So I went more than 30 years without missing a day of practice and commitment, and I constantly practicing even now today. So my ability has gotten better as I've gotten older and I put the work in. By the way, I've done some of the math. I've done more than 100,000 psychic connections in my lifetime.
Since you've been doing psychic readings for over 50 years, how have you seen the public opinion of psychics change? I mean, in the beginning, did they think you were evil or demonic, and now you're accepted?
Oh, absolutely. Most of the time, I'm accepted, or the field is accepted. In the early days, it wasn't very well respected at all, and I came up with a lot of problems or difficulties. But it was the changing times. And I was born just at the right time, at the beginning of the new era, as it were. And it was becoming more and more acceptable. Today, it's not a big deal to go and get a reading. 40 years ago, it was. And very few people would even admit to doing readings. And when I worked at the tea room, there would be people that would come to the tea room and get a reading from me, and they might see me on the street later and would ignore me or not acknowledge me. That happened. And as psychic fairs came along, but I think the real big thing that made the difference was the internet. People being able to go online. Across the street is the same distance between where I live right now and Australia. So across the street is right in front of me, just as Australia is, because of the internet. So we, or people in the new age, started spreading out. It became easier for people to do stuff and to learn. It became more acceptable, and it's become mainstream. So there's not that much shame in having a reading now, and often, it's quite acceptable. I still, after all these years, I in my private life, I don't really flaunt what I do.
Are you ever wrong?
Yes. Are you kidding? There is nobody walking on this planet that is 100%. Okay. Everybody's 100% when they're out. Nobody is 100% accurate or right on whatever they do. We always make mistakes. Always, always, always. And I've been aware of that since I was doing this also. And I guarantee the work I do, like if I did a reading for you today or 30 years ago, I guarantee from the time I do your reading until the ending of my life or yours. Oh, and since the mid 70s, all the readings I do get recorded, and my clients always have a recording. And if for whatever reason, one of my clients feels that the service I gave them was not of value, I'll give you back your money, and give me back my reading, and I'll just give you back your money. Now, if I did a reading for you 30 years ago and you come to me today and say, hey, Robert, that reading you did 30 years ago was a pile of crap. I want my money back. You're getting 30 years ago money. You're not getting today's money back, right? This isn't like a windfall, but I give back the money. I do that. And do I have to? I do.
What do you say about your customers or people,
clients,
that they'll say, why are you charging for your God-given talent?
Because it's how I make my living. I've got a couple of stories about that. But before I do, there's a guy named, I'm not a football fan, really a football fan. Who's the guy played in Boston and then he won a bunch of...
Tom Brady?
Yeah. Okay. Tom Brady has a God-given talent.
Right.
And he sells it. And he makes millions of dollars on his God-given talent. Painters make a lot of money. Artists, musicians make money with their ability. We humans have a God-given talent. We have a thumb. And there are very few animals on the planet that have a thumb. And that gives us something very special, a God-given talent. We can hold things. Oh, well, if you hold a hammer, are you abusing your God-given talent? Oh, if you're holding your hammer and you're making money at it, are you abusing your God-given talent? No. God gives you something to use. I would never have been anywhere near as good as I am if I did it part-time. The reason I've reached the level that I've reached is because of the hard work and dedication I've been able to give and to do, and constant practice. So I've taken what I have and expanded it and then given to people. There are very seldom that I've ever refused somebody. if they didn't have any money. There's been times, but there are very seldom a time where I don't do a reading for somebody and it's because they don't have the money. That almost never happens. So if I don't do a reading, and it might be because they couldn't afford, but there would be other reasons why too. That's what I say.
Once you've seen the future, like when you saw that hockey goal, can the future still be changed, or do you think it is?
Well, so you're asking questions. I guess so. The great questions, by the way. Thank you, Jeff. So we have free choice and free will to do anything we want. We're accountable, but we have free choice and free will. The future can be changed if it can be seen. So if you can see something, you can change it. There have been times where, classic one that I can remember, during, I think it was in the 1980s, the Winter Olympics were held in Calgary, Alberta. And when the Olympics were over, this woman had come to me for a reading, and it turned out that she was a producer for CTV stations across the country. And she was a producer and she was at the games. And she came to me for a reading, and she rode her bike up to my house. She got a reading. I remember her very clearly. Well, I can't remember what she looks like now. I remembered her very clearly, and it was a fun reading. And she left, and I did this reading that took well into her future. I saw a lot into the future of her life. 2 days later, after her reading, I was watching the late night CTV news, and they were doing an obituary for a woman. And I looked at the screen, and it was the woman that I had done a reading for 2 days before. And it turned out that on her bike riding home from getting her reading, she got hit by a car and got killed. How in the could something like that have happened if I am as good as I thought I was? How could I how could that have happened? How could I have missed that? Mm-hmm. It shocked me. And then I realized when something that is destined often cannot be seen. Because if it can be seen, it can be changed. And I saw something, but I didn't see her death. And it was her time. If I would have told her about an accident or seen it, it would have changed. And that's about the best that I can do when I say it. Or maybe I just screw up. And there are times when I have done that as well. Yeah. So that's how I deal with that.
It's interesting that you point that out, destiny, because some of my near-death experience guests, it seems like that their body shouldn't have been survivable.
Absolutely, yes.
And even during their experience, they're told, you have to go back.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So destiny cannot be changed. So if you can see something, it can be changed.
Well, since we're speaking about the future, what have you seen for 2022? I know that you're more of a personal psychic, but have you seen any global events?
Oh yeah, well, there's a few. There's going to be a lot. The second part of 2022, especially from around August onward, is going to be distinctly more enjoyable and more comfortable than the first 6 or 7 months of 2022. Around the world, certainly in our continent, I'm in Canada, so we're part of North America, and a lot of the free world, as it were, the first world, we're going to be going through a lot of economic challenges and crises. This is going to be worldwide. A lot of conflict between old friends, and a lot of conflict between our old friends and other enemies, or like your country and us, because of it, are going to be very close to a major clash with the Russia. It's building now. It doesn't happen, but it's building, and late April, May is a really scary time in the world. It's not as great as the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it's quite up there. COVID is going to be with us for another 2 or 3 years. However, the difference is, as this recent strain has come along, it's distinctly weaker than the other two, or the viruses that have been hitting us. And that's going to be the way of this particular pandemic, how it's going to be. So there's going to be a fourth round, but the COVID virus that mutated will be considerably weaker than the one that's charging around North America and different parts of the world now. It'll be weaker, as this one is weaker. And then there might be a fifth, but it would be like catching, the sniffles or something like that. So that's going to go on for a couple of years, but certainly in the autumn of 2022, it isn't going to be one where people are shooting at each other, as it were. I'm using that as an example, arguing with one another, and it's not going to be quite as crazy. So we'll have most of our freedom back. Well, we're more locked down than you guys are, but North America, we'll have most of our freedom back as we're into the fall months of 2022. There is going to be a challenge for the president, President Biden. Some type of cardiovascular problem could be affecting him. I'm not sure if it'll be made public, but there is going to be some. The former president, Mr. Trump, will have some major legal problems, and also have some major health problems near the end of the year as well. He's going to be in the news a lot. When your country reaches later in the year, October, November, you're going to be kinder to each other. You're going to be nicer to each other. And this is the beginning of a really special transition happening in your country. There are a lot of wounds that are multi-generational, and wounds from what has been self-inflicted on American to American from many generations ago have never really been healed. And through this year, it starts happening, and Americans will start healing each other, and the nation will be healing. It's quite exciting to see. It probably won't peak in my lifetime, but really a good chance that it will in yours. And there'll be a reason why it's called the United States. And that's and so what I'm saying is America is going to be doing a lot of healing, I think some of the events of last year that are being celebrated today have scared and frightened a lot of Americans. And, it's either go to war or make peace.
Well, thank you for sharing those predictions.
Now, by the way, I'm not one that does these types of things very often, and I've never said what I just said. You asked me, and I just focused in if I were doing a reading.
Do you think being psychic is the same thing as being spiritual?
No, not at all. It's two different things. Almost everybody is psychic. Being psychic is not a spiritual gift. Being psychic, mammals, all mammals have a sense, an awareness. It's what and specifically for humans, part of this instinct is what got us out of the caves. And it's a survival skill. Has there ever been a time you were just sitting somewhere, maybe even reading a newspaper or something, and you look up and someone's been looking at you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Or you're looking at somebody, you're maybe walking down the street and that person turns and looks at you. That's being psychic. That's the first start of being psychic. So being psychic is getting in touch with our natural instinctive abilities. Being spiritual has nothing to do with those skills. A lot of people that do readings or give service and psychically and clairvoyantly, or however they describe it, tend to be spiritual or focused in being spiritual. But the two work very well together, but the two can be separate. And what I do I used to teach a class, and I'm going to be teaching another one online over the next year. I used to teach a one-day seminar, and I would take a group of strangers, or a couple of friends would come, but a group of strangers in a room. We'd lock the doors for the day, and I would guarantee those people in that room that they would be doing psychic readings for a stranger before the end of the day, and if not, I'll give you back your money. And I only gave back money a few times. And I did that for 25 years or so, and I've had as many people in the room as over 300, and as little as 10. And what I tell people is pay attention to what's obvious. When you become aware of what's obvious, then more becomes obvious again. And then when you become more aware of what's obvious, then even more becomes obvious. And when you practice becoming aware of what's obvious, eventually, when you're focusing, what you're seeing is not obvious to people around you. And I teach, that's one of the things that's one of the pieces. Look and see, feel, get in touch with all of your senses. We think of ESP, extra sensory perception. Well, somebody who has ESP, that implies you've got more than normal people. Everybody has ESP. We have 5 common senses. I think there's a whole lot more been discovered, but I'm old-fashioned. Let's say there's 5: touch, taste, smell, see, hear. When you take all of those senses and use them, put them all together, you get a 6th sense. And that's where the intuition or psychic ability comes from. It can be taught. Can everybody do it? No. Think of a bell-shaped curve. At one end of the bell-shaped curve, there is one person that has absolutely none awareness. And then there's a guy at the other end. I would have liked to have been him. He is absolutely 100%, absolutely got it all, right? And then the rest of us fit somewhere in between. And by developing and practicing those skills, you can do psychic readings. You can start using other ways to get you there, but basically being psychic is a natural phenomenon that almost everybody does experience and has. We all have it.
Now, when you say
Yeah.
notice the obvious,
Yes.
can you be a little more specific about that? Is that what you obviously see when you look at the person, and you hear, smell, touch?
Okay.
Or?
Slightly different way to say it. So primarily my career has been a psychic. It's what I've done. But I get avocations as well, and I get really obsessed about them. And there was one period where I got really into baking, and I lived in a remote community, and people didn't know that I was Robert Lindsy Milne psychic. They thought I was a pastry chef, but I never charged. I just baked, and I used to bake every day, and I always did readings, not in this small little town. There was, I'm trying to remember why I said that. So please tell me the question again. What is it? Because I have the answer. I just can't remember.
Can you please be a little more specific what you mean by noticing the obvious?
Right. One of my avocations, one of my hobbies was I used to like to paint houses, inside houses, and it was one of the very few things that I was good at that was mechanical or, took physical skills. And I lived in one house for 5 years, and I painted it from top to bottom 5 different times in that 5 years. And I would paint friends' houses and things like that just because I really dug doing it. Had a friend who was a building contractor, and one day he came to visit me in my new house that I had just finished. And he walked in and he looked around and he said, "Who the hell did your paint job, Robert?" And I said, "Me." And he said, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Tell me the reason why you asked me that question. What did you see that I didn't see?" And he started pointing out mistakes I made. They were obvious to him. They were not obvious to me. But when he showed them to me, they were obvious. And I never missed seeing them again. And everywhere I go now, when I look at a paint job, I see the errors and the mistakes, because to me now they're obvious. Back then, they were obvious to Hugh O'Malley, but not to me. So that's the first stage of becoming aware of what's obvious. Look at the person, see them, look at the way they look at the way they listen to how they talk, just pay attention to them. And then when you see them, you'll see more, and then more and more. A major part of my career has been appearing on radio and TV shows as a performing psychic. And I did my online or my performing readings on air the exact same way I do in person. And one of the things that I tell people, like when I'm doing a call-in show, is I want you to tell me your first name and where you're calling from. My name is Mary. I'm calling from Manhattan. Okay, great. Have a question, but write it down, but don't ask it. So tell me your first name, where you're calling from, and have a question ready. And I say, "Oh, thanks a lot, Mary. And by the way, what happened to the plumbing under your sink today?" And I would do that. And I would describe things. And in those days, I was doing what they do as remote viewing. I was doing that kind of stuff back then, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm not a disciplined remote viewer. However, I'm trying to remember the show last year. I was doing a call-in, and it was open line. I was taking the calls, and this guy came on. I can't remember, maybe George. Anyway, George says, gives me his name, and I say a couple of things to him. And I say, "Now, George, I need you to answer this yes or no. Do you live, or just answer it exactly. Do you live like in a large house, or do you live like in a small apartment type building?" And he said, "A small apartment type building." I said, "Okay, thank you. if you were standing in front of that building, facing the front, on the left side, I got a recording of this that I can let you hear. On the left side of the building at the top, right in the middle, halfway down towards the back, there's been some kind of water damage or something that's been, pretty serious. You need to pay attention to it. And the guy said, how did you know that? The roof caved in because of the water damage last week. All right. At that time, in that moment, it was obvious to me. I saw it. I felt it. Okay. So I described it. I felt it was obvious. Before that time, it wasn't. But when I was connecting to this guy, things got more and more obvious, and I said them. So I also still practice. And when I do shows, and even when I do readings, which I still do a fair amount, every month I take a couple of the readings that I've done and I watch them. And I watch how I've said what I've said. I'm constantly, practicing. When I was performing, and I've gone around the world appearing on radio and TV shows, I would also practice. I would also listen to the sound bites. There would be times when I would be doing a call, and I would be, saying stuff, and I'd be then saying to myself, Robert, this is crap. You're going to get caught. Anybody out there that's listening is going to see what you're talking about. They know it's going to be really obvious to them. This is, and then later on when I'm listening to an air check, and I remember the state of mind I was in when I was doing that reading for that person on the air. And I remember me saying to myself, man, you're going to get caught doing this because this is so bloody basic and obvious. When I listened, it wasn't obvious at all. But it starts with paying attention to what's obvious. So when I would take a call, or when I'm doing a reading for somebody in front of me, I would see things that would be obvious, but there would be stuff that's obvious because I'm already aware. And when you're at the stage that I'm at, like 57 years on the job and more than 100,000 connections, there's a lot of things that happen that I see that are obvious about people, that I've learned by being psychic, but now being aware that they're obvious. So pay attention, get used to looking, sensing, and that'll get you started. There's a whole lot of other things that go with it, but that's one of the things. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So I've taken it from being special to everybody can do it if you want to put the work in.
Yes. On a personal level, are you a
Yes.
religious person?
No.
Do you believe in God?
I do. I believe. I don't believe that there is a Christian God, that God is Christian or Hebrew or Muslim or Buddhist. I think our God, the creator, is many things. And I don't think God has a real personal opinion about whether you're a good person or a bad person. I would think of God as like a gardener, and a gardener would love all the plants in the garden and take care of them, and wouldn't expect the plants to be anything other than plants. So I think that our concept of what God is about the same as the concept that a whale would have of the Gobi Desert, the same amount of awareness, because we just don't know. We just don't know. I believe in being good. I believe in contributing. My big thing these days is being kind and giving, and I believe that there is a creator, but there's other things that go along with that. So, but as soon as you start putting a label on it, then you're minimizing whatever God could be.
Do you have an opinion of tarot cards or astrology?
Absolutely. I've never actually, well, astrology and tarot cards. Let's talk about astrology. Somebody can be an astrologer by studying the science of astrology. And I know a couple of people that are total. My dog just barfed on the floor. That's great. Way to go, Tyson. Thank you. And I know a couple of people that have studied astrology as a science, and they say this is what it is. I know a couple of people that do astrology as intuitive. And I know a lot of astrologers that do both. And it's also the same as tarot. There are people who can do tarot readings because they know what the cards mean. And then there are people who don't know what the cards mean, and they still do readings by focusing their attention on the cards, or that's their medium, what they focus on. And then somebody that would use a medium would be able to use it in any way that they would perhaps choose. So at the Cozy Tea Room where I started, I had to do things like do palm readings, card readings, crystal ball readings. Like right here is I don't know if you can see it, that I've had this crystal ball for almost 40 years. I've never really used it, but it sat beside me for almost this length of time. That's been beside me with every time I've done a reading or a show or something. It's just with me. So there's a lot of energy in that, but I don't look into the crystal ball and see things. I can put tarot cards down and sense things, but I really won't understand what the tarot are about. But I don't need to do that. And one of the things that I do with people that use a medium, I don't say you shouldn't. What I'd like to do is show them a way to do it without using their medium, and then when they can, apply it and add it to their the quiver they keep their arrows, or add it to the quiver. So, and it doesn't matter how somebody gets to the right answer. This isn't like a mathematics exam where you get points because you know how how you got to the answer. In this business, it's did you get the answer or not? Mm-hmm. So you get like 100 points for getting the answer, 0 if you don't. You don't get points because you know the process.
Right.
Okay.
Now, I was checking out your YouTube channel, and
yes,
if you can give me a couple things. One is, what is the name of your channel? And 2, I saw a video about twin flames. So what do you know about twin flames?
The name of my podcast is called My Side of the Crystal Ball. And when we were in rehearsals, or when the producer and I made the arrangements, she said, we'll have to come up with a name. And I thought, how about My Side of the Crystal Ball? And the way I also came up with it was often when someone's saying, how's your day? Or I'll say to somebody, a friend of mine, I got to get going. I've got a long day of slaving over a hot crystal ball. Like I often use that expression, and so that's how I came across My Side of the Crystal Ball. And the question you asked, the second one was about...
I noticed that you had a video about twin flames.
Yes.
What do you know about them?
Not a whole lot. The guest's name, her name is El Hari. She is naturally an American, but she did live in Canada for 6 years. She's a lawyer, was a lawyer. And she has a twin flame relationship with her ex. He was a Canadian, and it was a really intense, acrimonious one. And I'm not telling tales because she talks about it in the podcast. According to these people, and I cannot say that it's right or wrong, and I'm not going to even try. and I would lean to listen to what anyone will say rather than say it's not. She claims, and people that are interested in twin flames, is that everyone on the planet has a twin flame. And that what that means is two beings sharing the same soul. So two physical beings sharing the same soul. And the impact that they have on one another when we're having those twin flame relationships. And a lot of the time they can be intensely acrimonious.
All right. Well, due to time, I need to switch gears with you.
Please.
How do people contact you or find you?
Well, you can find me on my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com. You can find me on my podcast, My Side of the Crystal Ball, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. I can't believe I'm doing all this kind of stuff. Do you know how long it took me to do the call to action to get it right? So anyway, I just did it now. So that's how you can find me, right, Robert Lindsy Milne. And love to hear from anybody. Just send a message and say hi.
All right. Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I'd like to. I would leave it with the way I end my podcast, and these are my real inner beliefs, and so how I'd like to leave it is: do good, stay safe, and above all, just be kind.
That's great. All right, Robert. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate you, and I wish you massive success in whatever you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
All right, take care. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.